Episode number 330, 2021 year in review with the 1230 team. Let's do it.
This is the definitive podcast for helping you plan, create, and execute dynamic worship experiences at your church. Useful, practical content in the areas of production, worship, communications, first impressions, and more. This is Making Sunday Happen.
Hey guys, welcome to the show. Hope you're having a very Merry Christmas. Another light episode this week, a family episode, as I welcome a small group of team members from our 1230 Media team. We're going to chat about what we've seen in the church in the last year, some trends that we think might continue into next year, and more. This is just a few of the members of our growing team here at 1230 Media. We're really building something special. I'm honored to do ministry with these incredibly talented folks. One thing that you're going to hear me reference is several of our team members also work at churches or with churches on a consulting basis or have worked at churches. We are in ministry. I only bring members on our team who have a ministry-minded bent, and so you're going to hear that come through, a heart for ministry, a heart for seeing life change happen in the local church. So I'm going to send us right into that family discussion this week. It's a year in review with the 1230 Media team. Here we go. Hey guys, today I'm hanging out with the 1230 lead team. This is a super informal episode of our show. We know it's been a crazy year and we just wanted to hang out for a bit and chat about 2021 and then some trends that we are seeing in church world and where we might be headed in the coming year. Guys, what's going on? How are you?
What's up?
Hey.
How are you? See ya.
We are a crazy bunch, and in fact, before we started recording, we've talked about everything from child shows, Blue's Clues to shoes and everything else. So this could be very interesting. Hey, Trevor, you're center square on my screen. So let's start with you. What give us a kind of a temperature check of church world from 2021. Now, we will set up that you are also on staff at a large Methodist church in our community, so you have that as a background too. But kind of give us a temperature check of where you think we are.
Yeah, I like the center square. I feel kind of Brady Bunchy right now. Like,
Nice.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. I think from my perspective, it kind of depends on maybe denominationally, where you're at, also location in the country where you're at, or in the world where you're at. Kind of for us here in Lexington, South Carolina, our church has pretty much been kind of full-fledged back at it, I would say, probably in the past like 6-7 months or so. And so we've seen attendance continue to grow, people in person, but not only that, but we've actually seen our online attendance grow as well and stay really steady from what was going on kind of during like the middle of COVID. So for us, it's been that way. But at the same time, within our denomination, there are churches still within 5-10 miles of us who are doing all online, not any kind of in-person worship as well. So I think it does depend on kind of where you're at in the country, what's going on in terms of COVID in your particular area, but then denominationally too. We're in the United Methodist Church, and so we have a bishop, and the bishop gives certain instructions to all the churches within our conference. But, if you're a church that doesn't have kind of that kind of structure, then maybe the decision-making is a little more personal to your particular congregation. So I think it really has to do with kind of a lot of different factors. But yeah. I would say most churches that I know, pastors that I know, they are trying as hard as they can to get back in person worship, realizing it's a very important thing for the people of God to be back in person with one another.
Amen.
What do you other guys feel? Do you feel like it's kind of over and moving on, or do you feel like kind of depends on the area? What do you guys think?
I think here in Philadelphia, it's definitely not over. I don't think anyone would be bold enough to say it's over or moving on necessarily, but getting back to it and realizing we're changed because of it. Maybe we should have been changed before it. And so with a new approach, going back to it, nothing will be like it was. That's the impression I feel around here.
So, Rack, you also do a creative director role at Epic Church in Pennsylvania, in Philly. What are some things that you've really stepped up in the church online space and really helped them kind of change their game at Epic? Give me some temperature check of church online. Where do you think we're at?
I think it's hugely important. One of the things I like to say is that it was a hugely important pivot or responsibility to take on, probably a good 5 years, if not a decade before the pandemic. And then obviously the pandemic made a lot of churches need to take it on as necessity to be continuing to shepherd their people. And so at Epic, I was very lucky to come in at right about that time, and they had already decided that this was going to be a real effort of theirs. It wasn't going to be a temporary solution. And what I was able to do is really try to help them innovate the way they were thinking about it. We immediately didn't want to be a church with a camera in the back of our auditorium streaming the same show. We wanted to make something specific for the platform, and we approached that, and that's evolved time and time again to now a point where we treat it like its own location. It's a building. It's where people are and where they've come to find us, and where they come to be led in the Word. And so we've been doing everything we can to recognize the advantages that it offers us, and not focus on some of the disadvantages it might inherently have. And so it's been a really unique platform that I'm really super excited we've been able to put so much effort into.
Grant, what about you? I know you're in the St. Louis area. Tell me, do you think that pastors have really embraced we're not, if we have an online now, we're not going to go back. Like we want to be intentional about both?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely leveraging the technology that we have available, and you have an opportunity to reach more people. So I think being online is kind of an understood. And if you're not online, people are gonna be like, wait, well, where do I find you then if I'm not able to make it to church? If I have COVID, or if my kids are acting up or whatever. I think it's becoming more of a norm, and trying to adopt that would be obviously the next step in how to implement that. But yeah, I think as soon as pastors can get on, if you're not online, definitely get online. That's my personal message. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
That's something we're discussing right now too. Like, we're considering hiring a pastor who is straight up our online pastor. Mm-hmm. We have members now who are in Rhode Island, who are in Wisconsin, who are members of our church. That's never happened before. And that's kind of a new thing for us. And so we're trying to figure out what's it look like to live into this now, embrace this, and see this as the new way going forward.
Let me chime in. I think one thing that I think we've missed in the year, because we kind of just reacted as churches, is we didn't do a good job of the why. And so the why now is COVID is still a thing. So Rack, you just mentioned it. Myself up in Pittsburgh, I just have a friend who their family member died of COVID. So even though it seems like it's down the track and we're done, it's not the case for everyone. And there's obviously a lot of people on different sides of the spectrum. And so there's that discussion that goes on, but it's not ended for everyone. And so there may be a majority of your people that are back, but there maybe are potential people like, for example, myself, I'm about to have a kid, and the restrictions are there where when I have my kid, my wife and I can be the only one in the hospital. And that's still the case. There's no other people allowed to be there. So there still are restrictions. There still are people in your church that aren't comfortable coming back and engaging in the way that they have. And so I think what we did as a church, unfortunately, was we pushed everyone to go get a bunch of gear and then we'll go get the gear instead of thinking about the why. And the why is, at least up in Pittsburgh, we've had multiple people in our community, and we're a church that's not streaming yet, but they are going onto our website, reading our vision statement, and they're coming and talking to our pastors saying, I don't agree with what you guys believe, but I want to talk to you about why you believe what you believe. So I think if you're a church that is streaming, you probably are getting more than my small church is. And so you have to be intentional with saying, why do we care about those people outside the walls? Why are we going to create an experience for them? And like we've all said, it's an opportunity to encounter people who may not step foot in your door, have them understand who you guys are as a church, have them encounter Jesus, have them encounter what it's like to gather as a body. And obviously they're not there, but thinking of ways to try to make that come to life to them. So Rack, not sticking a camera back in the room and just letting it be stationary. The reason we push churches to say hey, why don't you consider ways to bring those people into the space and have them feel like they're a part of the service, have them feel like they're a part of what's happening in your church. So I think that's something we have to look at the why first. Why would we as a church spend money? Why would we as a church think this is important. Let's figure out why that is. And then once we've got our why, now we can start to put legs to what are we going to do? What do we have a budget for? What can we do within that budget to meet what we're trying to do as a church?
Yeah.
Well, and I think the why is so important because it can, like, we've gone through almost 2 years of this now. And so I think all of us, whether we're on church staff or not, everyone's just kind of tired. And so we're like, can we just go back to normal, which we know normal is not going to be normal anymore. And so to keep that why in front of us is really helpful because it's like, I'm tired of using my brain in so many ways of having to make decisions for this and that, and then contingencies and pivots. I just need a normal week of my life. And so it's easy to just be like, let's just go how we did it before. And so to keep the why in front of us that things are different now. And there are a lot of people that, my family, we also have immune compromise that we, have to stream online more often than, going into service. And so, things aren't the same. And so even though it can be easy to be like, my brain can't, handle all of the changes and let's just be simple. It's good to remember the why of this is why we're doing it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And to maybe wrap this up and clarify a statement I made before. I'm sure Carl has another question or two for us, but on the thinking of why, and a comment I made on the outset where I said, maybe we should have been focused this way 5 to 10 years before COVID, is there's two really big whys for online that I think all churches can at least relate to. One is because it's the biggest communication shift since the printing press. That's one why that everyone should really be considering. It is how we communicate. It's how we live, and it's how we spend a majority of our time. And the second why that I always keep in the front of my mind, and I think is biblically sound and represented by Jesus's life in a number of scriptures, is to be where people are, right? To meet them where they're at. And they might be on YouTube for a Logan Paul video or some other random podcast, but they might stumble on what we're doing at Epic Church. And if that happens, what's really cool about the internet and that way that it's evolved communication is that happened because YouTube recognized something about their behavior that thought they might need this message right now. And so that's such a cool technological closing of that gap that I think churches need to be really aware of. It's not something that's available in person. And so while all of us are in love with the in-person worship thing, it's important to recognize those advantages that the technology provides sort of inherently.
Stal, I know you work a lot with students too. How's this affected the student world?
Yeah, well, I got to say, I think kind of wrap what you were just saying, this idea of being there and being present. I know for us, we were probably late to the game in having the online presence. We had, social media and all that, but I've been thinking for a while about a YouTube page and what could we put there? How could we interact with students on YouTube specifically? That's the demographic that's there. And so when COVID, we first started having lockdowns, I was like, well, what do we do? Do we try to do a weekly message? Do we do content, or what do we create? For me, it was simple. It's like, dude, I've been working on this YouTube page. We're already kind of moving in this direction. Let's fire it up and let's get it going. And the response was good. I think obviously, like everyone, after a while, students kind of got tired of that. And it was just kind of like, all right, here's another thing. But now that we, again, in our context, we're kind of back in person, but we're still using that YouTube page. When we have a bumper video, when we do an interview or a game or something that we can film, we still upload it there and it still gets traffic to send them there. But probably the biggest change for us too is we have a 12-week class, so we do a confirmation class. And we did over the pandemic decide to record every single teaching. But there's just so many ways that we were able to use that when a student misses a class. Instead of being like, hey, you kind of got to get with the teacher or whatever, or come to a makeup class, it's like, hey, here's the video of what you missed, and you can watch it on your own time. When someone comes in and they're older, they weren't able to go through the confirmation class with us in 8th grade, we can say, well, here's a digital version of it, and here's how we're going to go through it. So I guess, I would echo all this stuff that, we kind of try to pivot and learn, but ultimately we're trying to find out, how do we live in this reality? How do we live online with some of these things and use it to our advantage? And it's been great in the student world for sure.
Steve, what about technology or software? Is there anything that we have been using that has really worked, or where do you see technology and software tools going next year?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously we've seen major advancements in cameras, and what we've seen a lot of churches doing this year is trying to figure out different ways to use different shots. And so placing shots in a way that makes people feel like they're in the congregation. When we obviously were shut down, many churches talk about how they were able to put cameras up close, and now that they're back and meeting in person, they've tried to figure out ways to do that. I think there's gear, detailed gear we could talk about. But overall, the camera technology is amazing that allows people to feel like they're in the room experiencing like they would be live. I think one thing that probably is going to continue to take some steps, and I don't know if any of you all follow Life Church, but this past weekend they hosted a metaverse like experience and had a couple people raise their hands to follow Christ. And so I think that's probably the next shift that's about to happen. And like Rack's been saying, this has probably been in the surface, obviously going on the past couple of years, and like the church tends to do is we're kind of late to adopt it. But I think that's probably the next area where there's an opportunity to meet people where they're at, where they're not going to necessarily go to YouTube, but they're going to be in their VR space. And are some churches going to take that step and enter into that space? And that would, some churches like Life Church will be able to push boundaries with what they can do with cameras. But I think any church, I think I was talking to a buddy of mine who just got a new job at a church in Texas, and he's talking like, how can we add movement to cameras? How can we get high quality cameras that capture what's happening in the space? Why would we do that? It's to, again, bring people into what we're doing and let them feel and experience and not see an iPhone that's 300 feet back where the person on stage is a little pencil. So we're trying to bring people in. I think that'll continue to be the case. I mean, the switcher technology is amazing. So I've seen a lot of churches dive into how can we switch content specifically for each venue. So in person, making it customized to what the in-person room experience, which is more wide shot, seeing the overall room, and then a customized switch for online. So I think those will continue to take steps. I've already seen churches that are upgrading. Everyone went with the A10 Mini last year, and now you're seeing churches that are trying to enhance what they do on a Sunday to Sunday experience. And software wise, I don't want to necessarily be biased in my personal take. So I'll just say, if you're not using a presentation software, you need to, and depending on what presentation software you're using, there's a couple of them out there that have done a really good job of trying to tailor specific features for what we're dealing with in an online space. So streaming your service online, allowing you to present both an IMAX shot and also announcement slides and lay stuff on top of it. In essence, kind of make it a basic switcher. I think if you're not a church that's using presentation software, reach out to me, and I'd love to talk to you about some options that I'd recommend. But we should definitely, as a church, not be using PowerPoint anymore.
Yeah.
That should be dying.
You heard it here first.
You heard it here first. Can we please put PowerPoint to death?
Right.
And publisher, if we can add that.
Okay, cool. Yeah. What else do we want tonight?
Let's make a list.
Let's go ahead and have a fire.
Okay,
throw all
here
the
we go.
words. So PowerPoint, publisher.
Nice.
Some would say Final Cut. I wouldn't say that. So
I would.
No.
Oh, Grant.
I'm a PC guy. I'm a PC Android guy.
Where's the drop a caller?
PCs should not be a part of it. We should just throw PCs out, Max.
Okay, I gotta go, guys. It's gonna be like this somehow.
Well, Christian, you want to add to this madness?
Yeah, I think with all of this, I don't think it needs to be looked at as a problem to solve necessarily, but an opportunity to, reach people and do, have a means of communication that, that we can have a further reach than we ever had before. So, I've seen people do great things like thinking of this as as online as like a second campus. So, if you opened up an additional campus, what would you do? You'd have a campus pastor, you'd have, an online pastor, you'd have volunteers dedicated to communication and bringing people in and helping them with next steps. So I think that's been probably the biggest things I've seen success-wise for, the past couple of years, is people thinking of this as an opportunity and as just an additional church campus.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I love your opinion on this, Christian, and JT, you too. Do you think that pastors, especially, have made the shift in their mind of the online viewer? Like I can count that person too, or I need to be intentional about ministering to that person just as much as the person in the room. That make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I think like with, I've seen a couple different people who are, almost try to take over or like start to shift the budget away from online so that we can draw people back in. And that's like the goal, to get people in, in person, which I think is a great thing. But again, I mean, I don't think it's a problem to solve. I think, obviously, if you look at any scripture, there's no one person is, one soul is better than the other. So, I mean, absolutely. Online is just as important as in person.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, I think the church I'm at, we went through a period of time where it was just online. So as a pastor in an empty room talking to a camera for, an extended period of time for us. And I think it carried a sense over from that to now that we're back meeting. We're intentional about having an online host. So someone that's intentionally scheduled there every morning to engage with the people that join with us online. But then also like even just little things like, noticing the pastors at my church that preach every once in a while will make a point to look directly at the camera while they're talking to, speak to the people who are watching online. So, I think there is ideally, I'm definitely a guy that's like, it's good for people to come meet in person. And I think it is good that the church do everything they can to encourage that. But also, with the mindset that, there are people that probably are still participating in online church, maybe out of convenience. But that's better than them not coming to church,
Mm-hmm.
and hopefully through, us regularly providing that, online platform, they'll be encouraged to join more in person.
Yeah, when we first really dug into online, we hosted a series called IRL, which is internet vernacular for in real life. And the premise was, this is real life. Like this is really church. And maybe some pastors need to hear that. I hadn't considered that, but we made it for our congregation. And we were saying, hey, if you're grocery shopping on Amazon, you're still really grocery shopping and still really get to eat that apple. If you're watching a movie on Amazon Prime Video, you're still really seeing that movie. It's not like it's any less that movie because you weren't at the movie theater. And we just wanted to set that mindset that you are very much really at church, and church online right now might be a bit like Netflix 1.0. We might be mailing you the DVD right now, like in terms of our technological progress and where this will go. But it has the opportunity to be that much a part of a meaningful part of your life, a real church experience.
I mean, the truth is, it's not really anything new. If you really look back to it, I mean, as Paul wrote letters and sent them to churches all over the place, like, I mean, he was doing it online essentially. He was sending them to encourage the church that was far away. So it's nothing new. I mean, nothing's ever new. We're just kind of reinventing it for the times appropriate for us today. I mean, same thing with, PowerPoint versus, ProPresenter, Media Chat, whatever it might be. I mean, it was stained glass before it was all that, So we've always been trying to tell this story. It's just we've had to figure out new ways to do it in new times. So,
Angie, what about Design World? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, to tack onto that, I think it's really important too that those of us in the church are careful how we speak of that, because if someone is online and they've never gone to a church, like someone said, that's better than nothing. And so to say, well, they're online, but ultimately here's the goal is to get them in the church. We know that, but like, I think it's really important to like, be careful how we're using our language in speaking about this, because they're going to hear the sermon just the same as in real life. They might not have that, face-to-face connection yet, but the last thing we need is to feel like, well, you're not quite good enough because you're not like in person. And so I think we just need to kind of be careful as we're treading this new territory of not elevating one over the other, even though in person is probably our ultimate goal, but just how we're talking about that.
It's a challenging thought to some, but I don't think coming through your front door is necessarily the goal. I think knowing Jesus and growing in your faith and becoming a person who walks in the word is the goal. And that could be accomplished long before you walk through those doors.
Absolutely.
I think that goes back to kind of a discipleship philosophy, right? Where we've always kind of had this idea of here's everything you need to do to be a Christian versus, hey, you need to come and know Jesus. And allow the Holy Spirit to do that. Because I do think there's value. Obviously, the community aspect is the one part that, even that, I think Raxo would say, right, you can have that online. That's probably the hardest one that I think is to replicate. But even then, I think it's the Holy Spirit that will start to move in someone's heart to say, man, I've been a part of this church. Maybe I've been online for 2 years. I need to go check them out, or I need to go join an in-person small group. But again, it's allowing the Holy Spirit to do that work and not being like, all right, here's what you have to do now that you've got to come, you got to give and all that.
Angie, I was going to ask you about design. What have you seen? You're one of our designers on the team. Tell us what you've seen as far as a design shift. Do you feel like you're designing more toward online? And I know that you've gone from a church staff to working with us a whole lot. But I want you to speak into any design trends that you might be seeing.
Yeah, I think someone has said this. It kind of depends on where you're at in the country and what your church makeup is. I'm seeing obviously more like online type of digital design for online experience, but I also see print pieces coming back. For a while, there was no print pieces, no touching of anything, and so print design was basically dead there for a while. But I think what you're seeing, or what I'm seeing, is you're now having this hybrid. And so I think churches, and if you have a creative team on your church, you're realizing this is a lot because you're having to do print and you're having to do digital. And if you're lucky and your budget has survived pandemic, you might be adding, and hopefully you're thinking digital is its own space and starting to staff that way. But I know a lot of churches aren't. And so you've got your little creative team, if you have a creative team, trying to do all of this now. And whether or not it's effective, I don't know. And so I would like to see, I think I've seen some of this, but I'd like to continue to see more churches partnering with a service like 1230 to either, you go on and you buy something that's already made that you can customize, or you partner with someone to actually custom make some, whether it's digital, whether it's print, or, all of it. I think that's how creative teams are going to survive in the church world is, if you're not staffed for it, and if you don't have a budget to appropriately staff, help yourself out and at least try to alleviate some of that by hiring someone else to help you.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point. And I think that's why we've seen some growth in our ministry over the last couple of years. And I think that I'm really excited about that because, one, we can do more ministry. And two, I think we're helping churches that either don't have a creative team or their creative team is so slammed with and so overwhelmed with, and that's really where 1230 came from. I was at a church where I was kind of the only guy, and so to have a service like 1230 that you can do ready-made stuff and customize, pull from a library, and also have us build stuff custom for you. I'm really excited about serving churches in that regard. Grant, do you want to speak to that? I know you've obviously you've been with us for a long time and been able to serve churches in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, as far as what 1230 is offering, I mean, if you don't have somebody on your staff and don't have the resources to get somebody in house and there 5 days a week, or aren't doing anything with the frequency, I see a huge value. Church I'm at would use in-house services, volunteers. We had somebody on staff at a point, then we lost that person, and we had more volunteers come in that actually did that professionally, like myself. And I was able to volunteer through that, but they would also fill in with 1230 as well for those higher end content pieces, for countdowns and bumpers. and actual curriculum and all that kind of stuff as well. So it's a pretty valuable and viable option if you're a smaller church, and it's affordable as well for most.
Mm-hmm.
And even for a bigger church, you mentioned one person 5 days a week. That's not right. Let's be real. That's not nearly going to meet the creative needs of most churches. And all of us have been that staff member or volunteer whose bandwidth shrinks real fast. Right? We start to do some work that has a real impact on the ministry of our church, and suddenly we become very popular. For requests and additional work. And so I think services like 1230 are really valuable to churches of all kinds of sizes, because if you get into this and you have success with it, you're only going to need more. There's no doubt about that.
That's right.
I think, Carl, the reason you've seen such an uptick also in the past couple of years is, during this whole pandemic season, ministry's harder. It takes more energy. It's more difficult to reach out to these people that are maybe online or not in person where you're seeing them every single week. And so the time that you need to be able to come up with the ideas, create the videos and the social posts, all the stuff, like to take that off your plate so you can spend more time actually doing discipleship and doing ministry, that's a really important thing.
Yeah. Stal, let's kind of shift through to 2022. A lot of churches, there were churches who suffered financially. Some didn't. Some actually saw an increase financially. And I have a stat here that attendance is actually better in 1 out of 6 churches than it was in 2019. So some churches are seeing decline or a split audience between physical and online still. Some are seeing an increase. The church I attend is seeing a massive increase in physical attendance. So it's kind of all over the board a little bit. What are you seeing, and what are you hopeful for next year?
Yeah, well, I would say the greatest thing that I think is just that, again, none of this catches God by surprise. And that's kind of like the cliche, but I think that's true. Like, we have to be reminded of that. And so one story that kind of came to mind as I was thinking through these things is, our church received a really large donation right before COVID hit, kind of like the lockdown period. The kind of donation where, like, our pastor came to a meeting and he was like, I'm not sure what to do with this check. Like, will they take this at a bank? And it was kind of crazy because it was in January and the lockdowns were starting to happen in March of 2020. And it was just kind of like it seemed so out of nowhere. And yet then as we went into that time, there's all this uncertainty, especially in the front end, before we started to see the trends and started to see that for a lot of churches, giving maybe did continue or got strong. But it was kind of a nice sense of being like, man, I feel like God has said to us, hey, I'm about to take care of you in this season. This is one thing that you're not going to have to worry about. But again, I think God does that. And obviously that's not everyone's case. There's some churches that have suffered greatly. But I think knowing that God is going ahead and paving the way and preparing some of those things is really the hope and the trust. We can guess and we can speculate. I think there's a real spiritual need that we've seen. It gets accentuated, especially during a time of uncertainty, a time of, some of the mental illnesses and issues that have kind of come to the surface because of this time. I think people need more than ever and are turning to churches in this season. But the truth is we don't know. And so I think as we move forward, it's really keeping that posture of like, okay, God, lead us and direct us and guide us. And let's explore the online world. And again, I think for a lot of churches, especially smaller, older churches who, they weren't doing the online thing yet. They're learning and they're developing. And like we said, this is part of our culture now. I think you almost kind of have to. So it's cool for me to see just how God prepares the way and really, uses anything, even the craziness of where we're at now to really continue to bring forth his kingdom. And so I think the changes in churches has probably been a positive. And I think as we go to 2022, there'll be new things that we didn't expect. There'll be some stuff that maybe we could have predicted or maybe we should have thought about more. But I think our job is to kind of keep following his leading and being like, oh, I didn't think about that. Let's move this way. Or, oh, we were kind of wondering that. Let's go and chase and pursue that. So kind of keeping that open mind would be my biggest thing for 2022.
Good. Christian, JT, we talked about with Angie a little bit about design world and trends there. What are you guys seeing? You guys are strong video producers for us at 1230. What are you guys seeing as far as design trends, video trends that we should be aware of for next year?
Well, I think prior to this past 3 or 4 years, video is definitely a mode for adding to experience and adding to branding, and usually an experience in the room, which is important. But I think through this and through churches sort of beefing up their online presence, we're going to start seeing more churches seeing video as a mode of outreach. And obviously we talked about, live streaming is a big way that we see that. But I even think about churches are starting to intentionally produce more content that has the end purpose is to be used somewhere online, either Facebook or some other social media. My church, we just wrapped a project where we did a series of worship videos where it's just the worship team getting together, and we recorded them singing a few songs, and those are just videos that we're gonna post online. Things even like I've helped the church sort of make an animated element to walk people through what they called their discipleship pathway. And things like, thinking about bumpers and things like that, but designing them more intentionally for, the intro to maybe like a video series that a small group would go for. So I think seeing churches design more content that intentionally to be used not just in the worship center, but out on online platforms.
Yeah. Christian, you got any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think using this stuff or thinking of this stuff with multiple end goals in sight, so yeah, like exactly like you were saying, JT, I have seen, I've produced like testimonial videos where somebody tells a story about how, they went through a tough time and how God affected that and changed their life. And that's used, of course, in the, to go along with the message and in the in-person experience. But also I've seen it's put online, and then people who don't even go to the church have seen it. And that is a big sparking point and a bridge that brings them into the church. So I think just thinking about, how can I use this in my in-person experience, but also on social media to reach people for, like you said, JT, outreach.
Yeah.
Well, and if I can jump in here, as far as like stylistically, what I'm seeing in design and video is, this isn't a new thing. I think we've all seen this, is the trend. It used to be like really clean, polished, slick stuff, and this probably started happening before the pandemic, just with selfies and all that kind of stuff. But we've definitely seen things are messy. And that's kind of like the style right now, is things are messy, organic, authentic. They just, if it's a grainy-ish photo or a not quality selfie, that's still going to be like, oh, this feels real to me. And I think that's just what people are wanting now. Again, that's not a new revelation. I think we've probably all seen that, but I see that continuing for a little while until we've kind of gotten over this hump of like, just be real, in all of your design.
You make a great point. Go ahead.
Yeah. I was going to say one of the cool things I've noticed, and it might have been around for a while, and I just came across it, but like YouVersion has these kids devotionals that I'll have my kids who are, they're always attached to their tablet and they're looking at YouTube and all that stuff. And they have these kids devotionals that are basically like stories that you would see on either Snapchat or YouTube stories. And it's just like a children's teacher, filming themselves, walking through a devotion. And it grabs hold of my kids like that. And that's because that's what they're watching. So yeah, I think seeing stuff like that is really encouraging.
I agree. I think a mixture of, and Raka, maybe you speak to this too. I think that there should be a mixture of raw type stuff, messy type stuff, and produced stuff. I think it depends on where it lives, what it's supposed to be, the intentionality of it. I think that. So I think there's a place for
definitely
nice, slick, a little bit more produced stuff, and then there's also a place for raw. Would you agree with that,
definitely.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think a couple of thoughts on this subject. I think it comes from a longing for the quote unquote physical real world, right? And so we want our phones to be representative of that. We want to feel things. We want to feel in the moment and have that level of authenticity. We also are being sold a lot of stuff through our screens. And so we want stuff of real value to not look like those ads. A large part of my personal social media is product photography, just because of my background. And I notice a lot of times if it looks too much like what the brand might share, they just assume it is what the brand has shared and they move past it. If it looks like it's mine, it's in my hand, I have a real opinion about this, it's engaged quite well. And I think that same thing applies. I think the second thought here that's like maybe a little thought-provoking, maybe a little challenging, is your youth leaders at your church, they need a seat at the table now. And so for decades, they might have been fighting for one. You might have thought, that's cute, or you stay in your space. But your children are making real friendships online. Your children are involved in real community online. And as the church grows to learn and try to build those things themselves, it's going to be the youth that are really going to present themselves as leaders in those discussions. And so if you're at a church where you're like, know how to do the fancy stuff, or I've got a creative director, or I'm working with 1230 and our media is all super sharp, I think you're still going to want to have those conversations with your upper age, teenage youth leaders about how you really live in this space and what people want to look at and see. I honestly do not think the best ideas are going to come from your church elders or lead pastors in that space.
Good.
I think it's the same too. With representation of people, where it's like only certain people can do announcements and welcome or be on camera, and I think hopefully most people have moved away from that, where it's like, let's just get real people up there. JT, you mentioned the YouVersion, and I've gone through their stories sometimes, and it's like, oh, there's Matt Chandler, or there's Judah Smith, and I just kind of like scroll past it. Today they had this morning I was looking at, they had a pastor from India that I'd never seen before, knew who he was, and I was just like, oh, who's this guy? And it develops that interest of like, this looks like a normal pastor, kind of just in his office sharing by himself, and so again, there's that level of like, hey, it doesn't have to be the most popular person or the most polished video, the most polished situation. It could be like real and authentic is a value.
Yeah. So let's end on this thought. Maybe Trevor, Steve, you guys jump in here. Do you think that there's more potential to gain than to lose in 2022? Do you think that we have, is the church dying? I don't know what the question here is, but Trevor, let's start with you. Maybe, is there more potential for us to gain? Give us an encouragement.
To me, there's kind of multiple sides to this answer, because I think from what we've been talking about mostly so far, it's been like all media, video, graphics kind of stuff. There's a lot to gain there. I think the space of online is huge, and it's only got more to grow. The place that I'm most concerned about, honestly, has less to do with about design and video, has more to do with theology and doctrine, and has more to do with what discipleship looks like for the future. That's where I'm concerned with what's going to happen in the church in the future. So I think there's still a place to grow here. I think there's still a place to be able to move forward here. But I think the church has to get really, really honest about who we are and what we believe and what we see to be true within our own lives. And if we can do that, then I think we've got a really good chance to see major, major growth in the future. I think people are dying for that kind of honesty and vulnerability, but the church has a hard time doing it. Traditionally, we've had a hard time doing it. So, so again, I think from a creative standpoint, man, the sky's the limit. And the technology that we have right now and the ability to be able to utilize it is so huge. But it's kind of like having, giving a 5-year-old a Corvette. If you don't have kind of like the backing behind it, the character, the integrity, the doctrinal convictions, those kinds of things, then you can do some really cute stuff, but I'm not sure you're going to make the kind of impact that you really want to make. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd love to hop on the back end of that, Trevor, because you spoke about discipleship and growing discipleship and opportunities there. And I think for the most part, a lead pastor at a strong church is going to have a real good plan for that. We've read Deep and Wide, for example, and we've got an example of what that looks like in person. But I think one of the things that's a huge opportunity moving into the new year is to recognize, again, online creates this opportunity to meet people where they are. And it's not about getting them and keeping them online, but even for your in-person ministry, recognizing that there's places, there's tools for that. And instead of doing the thing that I think a lot of churches feel is most natural, get them to our website to experience our service, or into this thing we're trying to develop over here. I think instead of some church, there's a huge opportunity in the next year or years for churches to turn their gaze to platforms like Discord, where communities are happening online and they are 24 hours and they do merge with real world experience. Patreon, instead of like, how do I get people from YouTube to learn to give, focus on, they already know Patreon. How do you teach them how to give as a Christian and what the difference is, right? And so I think when I think about potential in the new year, it's about, again, stay invested in online, but don't think about it entirely as this separate thing. There are tools online. There are places that people are familiar with, processes and things that they know, that just need the injection of God to make them real powerful tools for the church as well.
Awesome. Well, as we land here, guys,
let me just say one thing. I think one thing that has become clear the past 2 years is we as a church need to stop counting and we need to start connecting. I think so often we're consumed with counting what's in person, and then it's shifted to, listening to podcasts, people say, how do I track who's coming in online? And I had 500 people and that's all I care about. And I think that misses the point. Discipleship is I'm connecting with people. And so if I'm in person and people are in person, I want to connect with people and walk with them in person. If they're online, there are ways to connect with people where they're at and walk with them in that journey. And so I think, unfortunately, we as a church have done a really good job about trying to count our numbers and say, okay, we've got the numbers, we're doing well. And we're not doing the hard work of, okay, what does it look like to connect with each individual who's encountering our church where they're at? And if that's an online space person, how do I connect with that individual person? Like you said, Rack, I hadn't even thought of that, but yeah, like YouTube, like how do we connect with people who maybe aren't going to go off YouTube? Are there ways that we 100%. Can walk with them in discipleship where they're at and educate and walk, just like Jesus walked with his 12 disciples, how do we walk with everyone where they're at and teach them what it looks to learn and live the ways of Jesus in our life? And so I think that's just for me, as we've been talking about this, that came to mind, is we got to stop counting and we got to start connecting.
Good.
And that's
and it might be that desire to count or have that data for your executive pastor or your leadership board that is forcing this I feel this desire to push into your own platforms or build your own platforms, or they have to come to the website because then I'll know exactly where they are and who they are. And if you can curve that, like you're suggesting, there are better platforms already adopted. And I would say anyone under the age of 21 is intimately familiar with them and how they work. And I think if you get a hold of those and you use them for the tools they are for Christ, that's a real path to real meaningful connection.
And I think
in person and online.
Yeah. And I think one thing is counting isn't bad. Jesus talks about the sheep, 99 sheep, and he leaves for the one. The heart of that is I want to connect after the one who's lost. Yeah. And so it's good to know your numbers. I'm not saying, we're not stupid. Churches and businesses alike, we should all be good about tracking and knowing what our numbers are so that we can understand what our people need and how to connect with them. So it's not to say throw the counting out the window. It's just saying sometimes we make the second thing a priority instead of the first thing that needs to be priority.
If you do good connection, growth will happen. Like that's just true. You connect with students. We've seen it in student ministry. If you really do good contact work, really connect to people, be vulnerable, have relationship, growth will happen. The same thing within the church. But I think sometimes we try these other pieces to make the growth happen without the connection, and that will never happen.
Good. Yeah. Well, Trevor, as we land, will you pray us out and pray us into next year?
All right, let's do it. Let's pray together. Jesus, thank you for the honor that it's been as 1230 to be able to invest in churches literally all over the world. It's been an honor, God, to be able to come alongside them and support them, Father, for the ministry you've called them to. So, God, I pray a blessing over every church, every individual who will watch this. I pray that you bless them, God, and that you would use them to make a difference in the world. And it's in your name we pray. Amen.
The show notes for this episode are available now at makingSundayHappen.com.
Well, hey guys, hope you had a blast hanging out with us this week, and I hope that you are getting some much needed rest this Christmas holiday. We are really excited about 2022 on the podcast. We've got some great, amazing interviews in the can already that we can't wait to share with you. Next week, my good friend John Shelton stops by. John is the founder of More 320. It's a ministry that helps pastors and leaders with counseling and a place of rest and comfort. John and his wife Linda can meet with you completely free to talk through anything in ministry that you might be going through that you might not be able to share with those around you. If you're on a church staff and you're struggling and there's nowhere to go because you're in a small group with other staff members, or you don't feel comfortable sharing stuff with your leadership, that sort of thing, this is a safe haven for you to go to. So you're also going to hear more of my story and hear some of my past ministry struggles. It's not always easy, gang. In fact, you know this, ministry is very hard, and more of us are burning out. We're weary. So you're going to hear me and John talk about how we've wrestled with that in our past, and how you can find some healing as well. And we're not done. God is still very much in process with me, with John, with all of us. So we're just trying to help each other. Well, that is next week, John Shelton on the podcast. Well, wishing you and your family a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. I love you guys. Go out there and create some incredible worship experiences this weekend. I'll catch you in 2022.
Making Sunday Happen is a production of the ministry of 1230 Media. For show notes, archive episodes, and more free resources for your church, visit makingsundayhappen.com.